Hello and welcome back to the Biostasis Technologies podcast. I'm Max Moore and I have a special guest with us today who's going to help us think about some non-technical aspects of cryonics or biostasis. It's very easy to think that once you made arrangements with a cryonics organization that's it, you can sit back and everything's set. But I think all of us know that that's not actually the case. There's still more to be done. And some of the things you can and probably should do is something what Peggy will be talking about in today's episode. Now, we don't know what things will be like if we are revived in the future. Let's just assume we will be. How will the world be? Well, I'm actually writing something on that for my book right now because there are so many ridiculous fantasies about being harvested for organs or being turned into slaves, none of which are very plausible. But one real concern, of course, is we don't know what kind of income or wealth we'll have when we come back. It could be that there'll be some kind of universal basic income provided by AI and robots, or maybe you'll have to be indentured if you don't have any funds. So it's probably a good idea if you can manage to arrange to come back with some money. So that's what we're going to talk about. We really don't know, right? We could get lots of free money or free basic living. It could be if we have some investments that have managed to survive, they might have multiplied more than we expect due to faster economic growth. There are a lot of uncertainties. So the issue here is what can we do financially to secure our future given the uncertainties and the laws of the day? So I'd like to welcome our special guest today, Peggy Hoyt, who is an expert on these areas. And I'm going to let you, Peggy, tell people about your background, how you got into cryonics perhaps, and your professional background that led you to these topics.
Sure, absolutely. Well, and thank you very much, Max, for inviting me to share today. I came to the practice of law a little bit later in my career. I started out as a college recruiter, and then I became a Merrill Lynch financial consultant for a few years and decided I didn't want to do that and went on to work with a family-owned organization before deciding to go to law school. And so I went to law school at Stetson University, which is located in St. Petersburg, Florida. And knowing that I wanted to be an estate planning attorney when I went to law school. And I don't think most people know that when they set out on that venture. But at any rate, I came out of law school knowing that I wanted to practice in the field of estate planning. And I have done so now for 30 years. And I have been in practice with my law partner now for more than 25 years. And share the distinction of being a dual board certified attorney from the Florida Bar in both wills, trusts, and estates and in elder law.
Oh, okay, sounds you're pretty well qualified for this. And of course you co-wrote this book, which I highly recommend, the Cryonics Estate Planning Handbook, which you can tell us about. It's really a very practical and easy to read book on a topic that's maybe not a little bit daunting to many people.
It can be a little bit daunting, that's for sure.
Yeah. In fact, I think you have, in your book, you have a little bit about a sort of a checklist or a roadmap to getting this done. I don't know, is that a good place to start to sort of sketch out what the issues are and how you approach them?
Yeah, it probably would be a good place to start. The way I approach it with clients is that it's really a multi-step process. And I start with the simplest part, which is really just spending time getting to know the individual, learning about them and about their family, learning about their hopes and their dreams and their fears for the future, and learning about their assets. And then we talk about all of the different ways that we might address those concerns. And typically we're going to end up generally on the idea that we're going to create a revocable living trust, using that as a basic foundational planning tool. And this trust will ultimately become what we refer to as a personal revival trust at some point in the future. But we start at that discovery and decision phase, and then I move folks into a design phase where I have a lot of questions and a basic structure that I want to take them through so that they can think about a lot of the decisions that they might not have thought about before. And then after our design phase, we move into the signing phase. But the actual components that make up the estate plan are going to be the living trust with the personal revival trust, financial powers of attorney, healthcare powers of attorney, what we call a will to live, for the cryonics world. And it's kind of it's part keep me alive as long as possible, but once my standby team is in place, then you don't have that mandate to continue life prolonging procedures once the standby team's there. We also utilize a religious objection to autopsy and healthcare directives that have very specific instructions about what a person would want with regard to their healthcare decision making. So
Right,
is
so
that
the
kind of what
religious,
you had in mind, Max?
yeah. The religious objection, as I understand it, isn't really legally binding. Is that right? It's kind of hopefully persuasive. It's kind of like with coroners, you can ask them nicely, but it's really up to them in the end.
Yes, in Florida though, we do have a statute that authorizes a religious objection to
Yeah.
autopsy. So, so we do use that, and in some states it may be that it is more of a suggestion than a mandate, but certainly doesn't hurt if that is your preference to have something in
Right.
writing.
Now, why talk about trust at all? What's wrong with just using a will and what you tell your cryonics organization to do with your funds and write a will? Why is that not good enough? And why are we talking about trusts?
So you can always use a will to create what would be called a testamentary trust. I don't like them for cryonics planning purposes because of the delays that are often associated with the probate of a will. And I think a lot of people believe that if you have a will, you automatically avoid probate. And the reality is just the opposite. If you have a will, you guarantee probate. And so, depending on the state where you live, where your will is created, um, may create delays related to the release of funds and may create other issues that you didn't expect, such as challenges to your will, deficiencies in the will for some reason. And then, of course, a will becomes part of the public record and is under court supervision. So I like to use a trust because they're not under the court supervision and we don't have to release that information. It's more of a private contract that you make with yourself. And because you're making that with yourself, as long as it's not illegal, the things that you want, you should be able to set forth the terms and conditions for how you want your assets handled during your lifetime, in the event of your incapacity, and ultimately after your legal death.
Right. Yeah, the difficulties you have with probate and with wills is one reason, of course, that cryonics organizations don't accept that as a funding method because it would be just too uncertain. You have no idea what you're getting into and what legal fees might come to. So if we, assuming someone doesn't know anything about this, so we're talking about a living trust. There's also the idea of a trust to provide you with income in the future. Are these the same things? Does one linked to the other? Could you explain how that works?
So, your living trust is a trust that you create during your lifetime. You are generally what we would refer to as the trust maker. You would be the trustee and you would be the lifetime beneficiary. In the event you become mentally disabled during your lifetime, you've set up a plan of who's going to take over, your successor trustee. And then at your death, your trust actually becomes irrevocable and then produces this subtrust, if you will, or continuing trust that we refer to as the personal revival trust. So it is part of your living trust.
Now, irrevocable sounds, well, irrevocable. It might be a little bit worrying for people. So maybe we could talk a little bit about when does the trust become irrevocable and what are the implications of that, good and bad?
Okay, so your living trust is revocable and amendable during your lifetime. It doesn't become irrevocable until you pass away or you experience that legal death. At that time, the trust becomes irrevocable. And obviously, you're not there any longer, so you're not able to change it. And you may not want anyone else to be able to change it, which is why you would want it to be irrevocable. Irrevocable just means it can't be changed or amended without either specific instructions contained in the trust or without a court order.
And I think I read somewhere that it could be the court order, it could be the trust protector, or one of the other people who could maybe make a change.
It could be the trust protector, and the trust protector is a concept that we use in all of our trust based plans because it is our goal to keep our trust out of the court system and out of the public purview, if you will. So, a trust protector is like a private judge. It's either a person or an organization that you choose that would have certain powers that would be given to them after the trust becomes irrevocable. And for all of my cryonics trusts, I do use trust protectors because we don't know what's going to be the future. We don't know if we're going to have the individuals or organizations that we're naming as our successor trustees. We don't know if the laws are going to change in a way that might require an amendment of the trust at some point in the future. And one of the other things that Rudy and I have discovered is that even corporate trustees don't want to take on all of the responsibilities related to a person in cryopreservation.
Right. They want to divide that up into financial aspects, the investing aspects versus looking after the person and their personal effects and all those different areas.
Yeah, the corporate trustees are happy to manage the money, but they don't want to have anything to do with making sure that a person is still in active biostasis, um, or any decisions that would be related to what would happen to a person if, for example, the cryonics organization that they've chosen goes out of business for some reason and they have to be transferred to a different organization,
Mm-hmm.
or there should be some catastrophic event that would happen.
I've had a bit of experience while I was still at Alcor with lawyers coming who are trustees to make sure we still have the patient. And there's one fellow who would come every year to play golf, I think, in Scottsdale, and would drop in and before I went to lunch, he would just make sure that the Jew was there. I'd bring Mike Perry down to find out exactly which one he was in, and then he went away satisfied. So someone's looking out for them still.
Absolutely. Well, and I have that mandate for some of my clients. So before I can make a trust distribution, I have to actually confirm in writing that they are still in active biostasis.
All right. I'll just make a note for another question. Yeah, one thing that a lot of people think they know, and it's maybe a little bit out of date, a lot of people might say, well, you can't have these kind of dynastic trusts that are tied up for very long because of the rule against perpetuities. So can you comment on that, certainly for the United States, and I don't know whether you can for other countries as well?
Yeah, I can't comment on other countries, but the rule against perpetuities is basically a rule that says that a trust can't have an unlimited life. And because states actually compete for trust business, many states have abolished the rule against perpetuities or have extended the rule against perpetuities. So, depending on where you live or where your trust is sited, you might have a significantly long period of time. Florida now has a 1,000-year rule against perpetuities, whereas other states like perhaps Nevada has an unlimited, or they've abolished the rule against perpetuities.
In some places, about 300, 350 years, I think I saw. I think Arizona is something like that. I think it's now, only in the last 15 years or so, I think it's about 300 years. Hopefully that'll be enough time.
Yeah, Florida used to be 360, but they've now changed it to 1,000 because they really do. States really do compete with one another for attracting trust business.
Yeah. Yeah, we see that in other areas too, with company registrations. A lot of companies unregistering in California or unregistering in Delaware, which apparently is now a pretty bad place for litigation. So it's a good thing we have the federal system that gives us some internal competition.
That is correct, yeah. And we have that choice of venue where we want to cite our contracts or our trusts.
Yeah. Now, in devising a trust, for both while you're still cryopreserved and to bring you back, there are obviously some incentive issues if you think cleverly about this. What incentive can we give the organization to take care of us, and how can we give them an incentive to bring us back when the time comes? And is there any need in a trust to be paying out some money in the meantime before we can be revived? Is there any legal reason to be making some kind of payout? And if so, what should that be? So two different questions, I guess.
Okay, it is two different questions, but so the first one really is: do we need to have a quote unquote active beneficiary or an actual beneficiary? And I feel like we do. I think a trust without a beneficiary is not going to be a trust. So I encourage my clients to think about who they might want to benefit or what organizations they might want to benefit while they're in cryopreservation. And as a general rule, many of them feel comfortable benefiting the organization that's going to be in possession of their human remains, or research organizations that they want to support, because they want to continue the financial viability of these organizations to make sure that they are going to be there when we have the medical technology to revive them. So, yes, I absolutely insist that my clients have an actual beneficiary while they're in cryopreservation. I think the second question had
It's
to
kind of
do,
it's kind of connected to the same thing, really, because you're talking about what should you be paying out to the organization, when and on what basis, right? So that you want to pay them something to keep it as an identified beneficiary, but on the other hand, we want to give them also a financial incentive to bring us back, rather than just
right.
use it as a cash cow, right, for indefinite period.
Yeah, so I do have some clients that have created some plans, if you will, to encourage the organization. Perhaps you can envision it kind of like a profit sharing. So if you bring me back by X and so, I'm, I'll give you an additional 10% of the value of the trust assets. I think it can be a catch-22 for some people, though, because they don't necessarily want to be the first one that is revived. They want to know that we are secure in the technology before they do that. But I don't personally know, Max, and maybe you do, about how a cryonics organization decides who they're going to bring back first and in what order. Is it like an accounting principle of first in, first out? Or is it last in, first out because maybe we've gotten the better cryopreservation on the most recent person because our technologies continue to improve?
Well, we don't really know because we're not those organizations yet. That will probably that might be decades in the future, and who knows what rules and regulations there could be. But I would say currently the default would be more of the second thing you said, really. And it's not quite last in, first out. It's the best preserved first out, because in some cases people preserve 15 years ago in the past. Today, have got very good quality cryopreservations, whereas some people today, because things go wrong, there are delays, they have an aneurysm, brain cancer, or whatever, they may have a very poor cryopreservation. So I think probably highest quality in, first out is most likely. And I wouldn't imagine myself that we'd revive anybody until we'd revive many kinds of animal, had very thorough brain emulations that could see exactly what was going to happen. And we're already starting to move towards that right now. We're still kind of just moving from tiny things like C. elegans to other small creatures, but there's no doubt about it. Eventually, we'll better look at the entire human brain. So I can't imagine anybody would ever come back. No ethics committee would allow that, right? To bring back someone as a real experiment. We'd have lots of mammalian experimentation and in silico proof, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we
Yeah.
don't really
So
know. Apart from that, we don't know. It might then be who has the best, because it depends on the cost. It might be that it starts off quite expensive, and then most people maybe can't be brought back. But some people have lots of money set aside, and they may want to come back as soon as possible. So we don't really know whether the cost will just drop immediately. Probably not. If you look at it historically, maybe a lot faster than we used to historically because of AI or whatever. But I'm sure we won't have everybody come back on the same day, even those who are equally well
I'm quite sure of that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, so lots of people have creative incentives. Not everybody. They're just kind of content to, wait their turn. But some people do have incentives built into their planning for that purpose.
Because it's probably not a very powerful incentive if you say, I will pay my cryonics organization X% of what's in my fund, because these organizations, the ones who are holding the patients, are usually non-profit, so there's not be anybody really directly benefiting. So have limited plausibility, I suppose, although maybe you could get like a private bounty. Things get a little bit complicated there.
Well, or maybe the organization sees it as a way of raising additional funds for perhaps bringing back those that didn't were underfunded, perhaps, or didn't
Yeah,
have the same resources.
yeah, no, that's a good point too. Tell us a little bit more about a trust protector. Who watches over trustees? And given that this could be, we don't know how many decades, a century, it could be more. Any trustee, any individual trustee you have, obviously will probably be in the duo with you or dead. So how do we protect that chain of custody over time of your assets?
Well, actually, we probably need to talk to Rudy and to others more about this, but there is an organization that's been developed called the Committee of Perpetual Guardians, which is actually made up of cryonicists. And that is the organization that I have been using as a named trust protector for a lot of my trusts. Because it's made up of people who are interested in cryonics, it's made up of active cryonicists. And the idea is that they're going to continue to recruit into this organization the younger generations as they come along. And so hopefully they will be able to be the guardians or the watchdogs, if you will, for these trusts into the future.
We have to give a call out to Bill Falloon here, who's the man who makes this possible and
He
funds
is the
this
man who
like this
made that
event.
possible. Absolutely.
Covers all the expenses for dozens of people every year to get together, younger cryonicists, who hopefully will be the next generation and people we can rely on to take care of ourselves while we're helpless. So, yeah, as
And
usual.
that's one of the pieces of advice I always have to give people when they say, well, I don't have anybody. And I say, well, we always have to be working on developing relationships with younger generations so that we can continue to have thoughtful thinkers and people that are committed to our same interests.
Yeah. And I think we need probably a better way of connecting those people because individual cryonics organizations may sort of hoard that information. I don't know. Here at Biostasis Technologies, we're kind of independent of all organizations. If we could do something as part of our educational mission to connect people, that would be really good, regardless of the organization. I think we're all in this together, so we can set those little silly rivalries aside and certainly help each other in this way. But you have to better connect to those people. So I don't know how widely available those names are from the people who have protected guardians.
I can't really speak to that. I mean, I've seen a published list at one time, but I don't know whether they make that available on a continual basis. Um, I don't know the answer to that. We need to ask Mr. Falloon about that.
Okay. Okay, one of the obvious questions I have to ask are, what are the biggest estate planning mistakes you've seen cryonists make with respect to their assets?
Well, basically, they're about the same mistakes that everybody makes, Max. Number one is not having a plan. I have a lot of wishful thinkers out there. I mean, people who think about their plan, but they don't actually put a plan into place. Or they'll say things to me like, well, so and so knows what I want. Well, knowing and doing are two different things. So I have a motto that is wishful thinking is not a plan. The second is waiting too long. And that happens to a lot of people. They wait too long to try to craft a plan that's going to work for them. And because of waiting too long, they either have a illness or an injury or mental deficiency that might prevent them from putting their plan into place the way they would like to. So number one is not having a plan. Number two is waiting too long. Number three is failing to fund their plan properly during their lifetime. So if you create a plan and then you don't properly fund it, you may end up with a probate that you didn't intend, number one. So now you've got those delays that you didn't count on. And number two, you may not have the sufficient resources available in a way that you had imagined. And then the fourth thing is really not keeping that plan updated. So once they've created it, not just shoving it in a drawer and forgetting about it, but making sure that it continuously is updated as their life changes, as the law changes, and as their legacy changes. The who and the how they want to leave assets to.
I think I saw in the book, I haven't finished every word in there yet, but I think I saw that you have, or you suggest that people use a spreadsheet, or your imaginary couple that had a spreadsheet, I think, where they listed all their assets, which is probably a good way to keep track of them because you need to let the trust know what you have at the time. And of course, you may have new investments that weren't there when you created the trust, so it's important to track that.
Absolutely. Yes. And I suggest that people update this spreadsheet on an annual basis, and getting ready for their taxes is a very good time to do that. And the kind of information you want to have on this is not only what the asset is, but who holds the asset, what are the account numbers that go along with the asset, how is the asset titled, and who is the beneficiary if you also have a named beneficiary on that asset. And then just the particulars about the organization that holds it. As much information as possible. My bigger concerns are going to be for folks that have digital currencies and things that might be kept strictly online and strictly are only accessed through a password system. So making sure that people have access to those passwords is going to be crucial for the
Hmm.
future.
So this kind of touches on something I was just thinking about, and I think these grim thoughts every so often. Okay, what if? I mean, for me, I live with my wife, so it's less of an issue unless something happens to both of us at the same time. But I know cryonicists who live alone, and they may have made all these plans, but I'm just imagining whoever comes to, a welfare check eventually comes to see them, and they realize that they're not alive, and they come in, and hopefully they get cryopreserved well. How do people who enter the house at that point, how do they even know that a trust exists? I mean, obviously, we hope people will see our bracelets for our cryonics arrangements, but how would they even know you have a trust? How would you know which attorney to contact? How does that work from your experience?
Well, for my organization, number one, we provide all of our legal documents to our clients in a large red leather type binder, and we tell people not to lock that information away. It needs to be in a safe but accessible place in your home that would make sense for somebody to look for something of that nature. Like, don't lock it in a safe. Don't hide it in your attic. Don't put it in a place where people are not going to think to look for it. I mean, keep it right out on a bookshelf, and in our case, it just says estate planning documents on the side so that it would be easy for someone to find. The other thing that you mentioned is that sometimes if people do live alone, they do have crises, health crises that people are not aware of. And so I encourage my clients who live alone to sign up for one of these daily monitoring services where they have to check in by a certain time. And if they don't check in by that time, then there's a series of events that take place depending on the level of security you want. Either text messages go out or phone calls go out, or there's a call to an organization to come check on you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good thing to mention. That's quite important. I know CI has some kind of app for that. Alcor has the daily check-in system. If you are living alone, you have a health condition, and you're older, I think that's a very important thing to do. You don't want to make all these arrangements and go to all this trouble and then not have anybody find you for 2 or 3 days. That would not be good. So
that would not result in an optimal cryopreservation, would it?
No. I think another thing you can do is, I think you can go online and buy these things, packages that you can actually stick on the front or the side of the fridge that are labeled in a way that people coming in to do a check will say, oh, what is this? Like medical information, cryonics wishes, trust
Absolutely.
information.
Mm-hmm.
There's some neat packages you can get from Amazon.
Yeah, those are a really good idea, so that people can easily find the information that you need them to have.
Now, apparently, I have 2 dogs, and we used to have 2 cats, and we have 1 dog in cryopreservation. Our first dog, actually, Oscar, who's cryopreserved, 6 years ago or something like that now. So he's waiting for us, and I'm sure that the other 2 will be too, because they're such wonderful beasts. I understand you are quite an animal of your own. You have cats and dogs, and even a horse, I think. Do you have cryonics arrangements for your companion animals?
I do not have cryonics arrangements for my pets, but I am a committed pet lover. I have 1 cat and 8 dogs and 4 horses
Wow.
at the moment.
Do they all get on?
They do. They all get along very well. Now, although I don't have cryonics plans for each of them, they are all under a pet trust for their lifetime love and care. So that's also something that I talk to my clients about, whether they be cryonicists or not, is protecting their pets and making sure that we have a plan so that if something would happen to the pet parent before the pet, that we know that they're going to be provided for financially and that they're going to be in a safe and loving home.
It's a very good point to make, because I'm not sure everybody thinks about that. They just assume they'll outlive their pets, but that doesn't always happen. And of course, you don't want to have them suddenly have nobody to take care of them.
Well, and that is the problem with pets, is we do often make assumptions that we think that our friends or our family are going to be willing to take on that responsibility. And many times it's not true. And as a result, there literally are tens of thousands of loved pets that are euthanized annually because their pet parent did not have a plan for them.
It's funny, actually. It reminds me, we go to the park just north of here to walk the dogs every evening, and one of the park friends we made there had a funny episode. I don't know what age he is. He's maybe early 70s, in very good health. But he went to adopt a pet, and they told him he was too old, and he was very offended.
Oh my
They were
goodness.
expecting him to die any second. But I think he finally overcame that. It was quite
Well,
insulting.
that was pretty offensive, but there are lots of organizations that have programs that they actually call like seniors for seniors, so that a senior person could adopt maybe a senior animal. But if you have a plan for your pet, shouldn't matter how old you are.
If you do want to cryopreserve your pet, for your horse, that would be really expensive. And for 8 dogs too, it would probably ruin us. But how does that differ from funding for humans?
Well, it probably wouldn't be any different from funding from humans, except that you probably wouldn't fund it with a life insurance policy, um, unless it was your own life insurance policy. But um, you could use your personal assets. You could use, um, I mean, I guess in some cases, like let's say you did have a horse, you could buy a mortality insurance for a horse that could potentially fund a cryopreservation if you were bold enough to do that for your horse. Um, I think I see a lot of people considering doing cloning of their pets as opposed to cryopreservation of their pets.
That makes a bit more sense than with humans, I think, because if you assume that the genome actually conveys the main personality, and I'm not sure how much of that is, I guess, I'm sure the early upbringing has some effect too. You might get something fairly close to what you had. Obviously, they wouldn't have learned all the same responses, but they might be close enough that, in a dog, maybe that's enough. Whereas in a human being, I think my wife would be offended if I said, no, it's okay, dog. I'll just take a tissue sample and I'll make a
I'll
clone
just
of
be
you.
a clone, right?
Yeah,
I would say that 100% of my cryonics clients do not want to be clones.
no. So it's funny how people have that misunderstanding. It seems like I think it's because popular media movies frequently use clone to mean copy when they're really totally different things. Maybe a copy of you would be sufficient. That's a big philosophical argument, of course. But a clone is nothing like, it doesn't have any of your memories and not much of your personality, just basic traits, perhaps. That's not really a very close continua. It's not really, it's kind of survival, but in a very, very, very weak sense. It doesn't interest me very much.
Correct. Yeah. And I get that general sense from most of my clients. But really, one of the toughest questions that I ask them is I want them to give me their personal definition of what does a successful revival look like for you. And for every person, that could be a little bit different. And as we learn more about the various options that might be available, it changes from one year to the next.
Yeah, that's actually important. If you I just remembering from a long time ago, I can't remember how long this was, when Saul Kent gave a talk. Well, he talked about, I think he talked about the Reanimation Foundation in Liechtenstein, which, as far as I know, still exists, but I haven't heard about it really in a long time. I think that's what it was. It's maybe like 30 years ago. But he was talking about his own specifications for his assets to be returned to him. He was very exacting. He had a long list of conditions where the person had to better prove that they were him in various ways. I can't remember the details, but it was quite specific. But it is worth giving some thought to that, because what happens if you wake up and your brain is completely wiped and you're just a living body? Well, I don't think they'd actually wake you up in that case, probably.
Right.
But you might want to specify for various other forms of damage, lesser degrees, if there's anything like that. Or do you want to come back if it's going to cost 100% of your assets, or do you want to wait until maybe it's cheaper? Maybe you can put that in there. May or may not be legally enforceable in the future. It might be, but it should be at least a strong suggestion, I would hope. So,
So it's really hard to get people to think about that sometimes. Some people have some very elaborate thoughts, and then others just they really want me to make suggestions to them about what I've learned over the years. And some of them haven't given it any thought at all about what that looks like. And I think that's interesting, but it's something that I really have to get people to dig down deep sometimes and try to come up with these solutions for themselves.
yeah. The trouble is we just don't really know what the conditions will be like, so we're not quite sure what to specify. And you don't want to over-specify, because then they may never bring you back. If you insist that the GDP per person has to be this, or we have to have these kind of lifespans, or we have to have this kind of body, or we have to solve world peace, you may never come back. So
Well, that's true. And I do encourage people not to be too rigid in their thinking, because we don't know what the circumstances are going to be. And so we want to have some flexibility, of course, built into the planning.
yeah, it's worth thinking about things though, like would you would you have any concern if we replaced a whole bunch of your neurons with synthetic components that had the same function? Because some people, well, hold on, maybe I don't want to do that if it's over a certain percentage or something, or if it takes over my memory part of my brain rather than my hindbrain. There's all kinds of questions, of course, you could dig into there as to what's okay. And the big one being, what if uploading was an option? Maybe what if it's the only option? Would you want to be uploaded? Would you consider that to be you surviving, or would you consider that to be you're dead and someone else kind of who thinks like you has taken over? So it's probably worth specifying some of those questions.
Yes, and I think a lot of my clients do. They do agree with the idea of uploading and aren't opposed to that as being one of the definitions of a successful revival.
So that's a tricky one for me as a philosopher, because I think there are some ways that you could sort of upload me, have someone who's just very much like me, but I don't think it would be me. So, for instance, I think the current LLMs, AIs, are not conscious at all, not even slightly. I don't think they understand anything at all, not even slightly, which might sound like a weird thing to say, but what they're doing is statistical methods basically to come up with pattern matching. But I don't think they have the kind of overall system that really understands or feels anything. Now, I could imagine that you could actually produce something like me that would behave like me, have my memories at least as reported to the outside, could be behaviorally identical to me. But I'm not a behaviorist. I think you have to look at what's going on inside, and depending on how you emulated that or replicated it, might matter. So maybe like it's the level of the whole major brain systems that will matter. Maybe you have to duplicate the neuronal functioning. Maybe I think very implausibly down to an even deeper level, but. It's a tricky question. That's why people don't think about these things, because once you do,
Right,
you
it
start
is
realizing
tricky.
it's complicated.
And it doesn't get less complicated as time goes by, I don't think.
No, we just realize more possibilities, which is again a good reason not to overspecify, because we can't possibly envision all the possibilities in the future.
Right.
So we have to have some trust in the people, and that's kind of one of the, again, another tricky sell for biostasis is that we have to rely on the future. We're going to be spending it and rely on the people in the present and going into the future to take care of us when we're helpless, and that's not a very pleasant idea. But again, as we like to say, it beats being eaten by worms or incinerated in a gigantic oven. So we have
That
to put
is true. I have one cryonics couple who I thought they had an interesting solution. She wants him to be brought back first so that he can kind of take stock of what the universe is like at that time. And if he thinks then that it would be a good idea for her to be reanimated, he can make that decision. But if he makes the determination that this is not a world you want to come back to, then he'll have the ability to put the ixnay on her being revived.
It's interesting. I guess you could also tell people to flip a coin, so you don't have a 50% chance of being the pioneer.
Right, exactly.
There might be another option. It might be that they could repair your brain to the level where you could think, but not sort of get your body up to speed. And they could maybe then sort of bring you into a virtual reality and explain how the world works and show you it. And then you can decide, do you really want to come back now, or is this a bad time?
That would be interesting. Yeah, that would be very interesting.
But my own view is that any kind of plausible situation is going to be one I want to come back into, because if the world is a massive World War III, then they're not going to be bringing people back. If we have an apocalyptic wasteland, there won't be any resources to bring me back.
Right.
If people are just really horrible people and don't care about life, why would they bother bringing us back? All the bad worlds are ones which are not very likely for us to come back into. So any world we do come back into is likely to be pretty well off, have advanced technology, and probably pretty decent. So I'm fairly easygoing about being brought back.
Okay, good.
That's on
I
record for
think
the
that
future.
makes sense.
Yeah, the future AIs will come back and they'll scrape all the videos looking for our statements on these issues too. So.
That's right.
Is there anything that we haven't covered that you think is important in cryonics estate planning?
Well, I think it's really important to have your planning in place, to not wait too long, as we talked about. There are more and more resources out there all of the time. And I would just encourage people to think sooner rather than later about moving forward with a plan that meets their needs to coincide with their cryonics desires.
Now, your book lays this out all very well, and those puzzling numbers I gave you, 29 to 30, are the page numbers where you list the components of your cryonics estate plan. So, sort of, I guess to summarize, that first and most essential is a contract with a cryopreservation organization, obviously. Second, a cryonics-friendly personal revival trust with pour-over last will and testament. Oh, maybe we'll come back to that. I'm not sure we talked about
Okay,
pour-over.
yeah.
Then 3, a cryonics-friendly pre-need guardian declaration. 4, a cryonics-friendly durable power of attorney. 5, a cryonics-friendly healthcare directive. 6, a cryonics-friendly living will. 7, objection to autopsy. But one thing I don't think was mentioned was a pour-over last will and testament. Would you like to explain what that means and how it fits in?
Yes, absolutely. So even though we have a trust, we always still have a will, but the will serves this pour over function so that if we do end up with assets in our probate estate, that the instruction in the will says, take those assets and put them into my trust, because the trust is really where all of your instructions are going to be housed for your future. And so they go hand in hand. So you always, if you have a trust, you always still have a will.
So that part, if it wasn't already in the trust, that would have to go through probate presumably, and then the courts would look at that, what you say there, and then put it into the trust, hopefully.
Right, but they wouldn't have access to the terms and conditions of the trust. It's a statement in the will that says deliver all of my assets to the trustee of my trust.
Okay. Anything else that you want to mention
I don't
here?
think so. I think you've done a great job, Max, of hitting a lot of the highlights here. Um,
Yeah.
I mean,
I've been guilty of procrastinating too. I didn't procrastinate signing up for cryonics. I did that back in 1986, but it took me a long time. It was only, was it last year, the year before we finally set up a trust, and I still don't have like an income trust for the future. That's still to come. So I may be calling you on that. But yeah, to people out there, don't put this off. As Peggy said, you can leave it too late, and that's one problem with people signing up for cryonics too. Of course, is that I can always wait another day, another week, another month, and I think it will be fine, and it will be until it isn't. So contact Peggy, contact Rudy if you need insurance or other financial advice, and we'll put the information on here. Do you want to tell people where you are and how to connect you? What was the best way to reach you?
yeah, absolutely. So, and you can put that information on the blog or the chat if you want to. And so, I'm at the law offices of Hoyt and Bryan. We're located in Oviedo, Florida, and you can find us at hoytbryan.com. And easy to get a hold of us, and lots of good ways to interact with us either by email or by Zoom for questions that people may have.
And I know from reading the book and what you also mentioned earlier, I think one of the first things we do is just have. Um, I don't think you charge for it, right? Just an initial consultation to get to know the person and see if you're a good match before you
Yeah,
proceed.
we do a complimentary initial consultation. It's very short. It's more of a getting to know you and do we want to work together. Then we move into the more in-depth getting to know you, what we call that discovery and decision dialogue before we move into the design meeting and then the signing ceremony. And I'm happy to report that even though I work with clients all over the country, I've been able to encourage many of them to come to my office in Florida so that we actually get to meet in person.
Okay, so it's not in the middle of summer. It's
Right,
sweaty.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Peggy. It's great that you've applied your expertise and your decades of experience to helping people in the cryonics area. It's a niche market, but I think it will be a growing one, and you'll be the pioneer in this area. So I appreciate you
I
coming in.
I'm always working with somebody. It seems like at any moment in time, I've got at least one or two people that I'm working with. So I'm happy to do it.
Okay, thanks a lot, Peggy.
All right. Thanks, Max. Have a great day.